You have to leave later on today, La Gorda said to me right after breakfast. Since you've decided to go with us, you've committed yourself to helping us fulfill our new task. The Nagual left me in charge only until you came. He entrusted me, as you already know, with certain things to tell you. I've told you most of them, but there are still some I couldn't mention to you until you made your choice. Today we will take care of them. Right after that, you must leave in order to give us time to get ready. We need a few days to settle everything and to prepare to leave these mountains forever. We have been here a very long time. It's hard to break away, but everything has come to a sudden end. The Nagual warned us of the total change that you would bring, regardless of the outcome of your bouts, but I think no one really believed him. I failed to see why you have to change anything, I said. I've explained it to you already, she protested. We have lost our old purpose. Now we have a new one, and that new purpose requires that we become as light as the breeze. The breeze is our new mood. It used to be the hot wind. You've changed our direction. You're talking in circles, Gorda. Yes, but that's because you're empty. I can't make it any clearer. When you return, the Genaros will show you the art of the stalker, and right after that, all of us will leave. The Nagual said that if you decide to be with us, the first thing I should tell you is that you have to remember your bouts with Soledad and the little sisters and examine every single thing that happened to you with them, because everything is an omen of what will happen to you on your path. If you are careful and impeccable, you'll find that those bouts were gifts of power. What's Doña Soledad going to do now? She's leaving. The little sisters have already helped her to take her floor apart. That floor aided her to reach her attention of the Nagual. The lines had power to do that. Each of them helped her gather a piece of that attention. To be incomplete is no handicap to reaching that attention for some warriors. Soledad was transformed because she got to that attention faster than any of us. She doesn't have to gaze at her floor anymore to go into that other world. And now that there is no more need for the floor, she has returned it to the earth where she got it. You are really determined to leave, Gorda, aren't you? All of us are. That's why I'm asking you to go away for a few days to give us time to pull down everything we have. Am I the one who has to find a place for all of you, Gorda? If you were an impeccable warrior, you would do just that. But you're not an impeccable warrior, and neither are we. But we still have to do our best to meet our new challenge. I felt an oppressive sense of doom. I have never been one to thrive on responsibilities. I thought that the commitment to guide them was a crushing burden that I couldn't handle. Maybe we don't have to do anything, I said. Yes, that's right, she said, and laughed. Why don't you tell yourself that over and over until you feel safe? The Nagual told you time and time again that the only freedom warriors have is to behave impeccably. She told me how the Nagual had insisted that all of them understand that not only was impeccability freedom, but it was the only way to scare away the human form. I narrated to her the way Don Juan made me understand what was meant by impeccability. He and I were hiking one day through a very steep ravine when a huge boulder got loose from its matrix on the rock wall and came down with a formidable force and landed on the floor of the canyon 20 or 30 yards from where we were standing. The size of the boulder made its fall a very impressive event. Don Juan seized the opportunity to create a dramatic lesson. He said that the force that rules our destinies is outside of ourselves and has nothing to do with our acts or volition. Sometimes that force would make us stop walking on our way and bend over to tie our shoelaces, as I had just done. And by making us stop, that force makes us gain a precious moment. If we had kept on walking, that enormous boulder would have most certainly crushed us to death. Some other day, however, in another ravine, The same outside deciding force would make us stop again, to bend over and tie our shoelaces, while another boulder would get loose precisely above where we are standing. By making us stop, that force would have made us lose a precious moment. That time, if we had kept on walking, we would have saved ourselves. Don Juan said that in view of my total lack of control over the forces which decide my destiny, my only possible freedom in that ravine consisted in my tying my shoelaces impeccably. La Gorda seemed to be moved by my account. For an instant she held my face in her hands from across the table. Impeccability, for me, is to tell you at the right time what the Nagual told me to tell you, she said. But power has to time perfectly what I have to reveal to you, or it won't have any effect. She paused in a dramatic fashion. Her delay was very studied, but terribly effective with me. What is it? I asked desperately. She didn't answer. She took me by the arm and led me to the area just outside the front door. She made me sit on the hard-packed ground with my back against a thick pole about 1.5 feet high that looked like a tree stump, which had been planted in the ground almost against the wall of the house. There was a row of 5 such poles planted about 2 feet apart. I had meant to ask La Gorda what their function was. My first impression had been that a former owner of the house had tied animals to them. My conjecture seemed incongruous, however, because the area just outside the front door was a kind of roofed porch. I told La Gorda my supposition as she sat down next to me, to my left, with her back against another pole. She laughed and said that the poles were indeed used for tying animals of sorts, but not by a former owner, and that she had nearly broken her back digging the holes for them. What do you use them for? I asked. Let's say that we tie ourselves to them, she replied. And this brings me to the next thing the Nagual asked me to tell you. He said that because you were empty, he had to gather your second attention, your attention of the Nagual, in a way different than ours. We gathered that attention through dreaming, and you did it with his power plants. The Nagual said that his power plants gathered the menacing side of your second attention in one clump, and that's the shape that came out of your head. He said that that's what happens to sorcerers when they're given power plants. If they don't die, the power plants spin their second attention into that awful shape that comes out of their heads. Now we're coming to what he wanted you to do. He said that you must change directions now and begin gathering your second attention in another way, more like us. You can't keep on the path of knowledge unless you balance your second attention. So far, that attention of yours has been riding on the Nagual's power, but now you're alone. That's what he wanted me to tell you. How do I balance my second attention? You have to do dreaming the way we do it. Dreaming is the only way to gather the second attention without injuring it, without making it menacing and awesome. Your second attention is fixed on the awful side of the world. Ours is on the beauty of it. You have to change sides and come with us. That's what you chose last night when you decided to go with us. Could that shape come out of me at any time? No. The Nagual said that it won't come out again until you're as old as he is. Your Nagual has already come out as many times as was needed. The Nagual and Genaro have seen to that. They used to tease it out of you. The Nagual told me that sometimes you were a hair away from dying because your second attention is very indulging. He said that once you even scared him, your Nagual attacked him, and he had to sing to it to calm it down. But the worst thing happened to you in Mexico City. There, he pushed you one day, and you went into an office, and in that office you went through the crack between the worlds. He intended only to dispel your attention of the tonal. But you were worried sick over some stupid thing. But when he shoved you, your whole tonal shrunk, and your entire being went through the crack. He had a hellish time finding you. He told me that for a moment he thought you had gone farther than he could reach, but then he saw you roaming around aimlessly and he brought you back. He told me that you went through the crack around 10 in the morning. So on that day, 10 in the morning became your new time. My new time? For what? For everything. If you remain a man, you will die around that time. If you become a sorcerer, you will leave this world around that time. Eligio also went on a different path, a path none of us knew about. We met him just before he left. Eligio was a most marvelous dreamer. He was so good that the Nagual and Genaro used to take him through the crack, and he had the power to withstand it as if it were nothing. He didn't even pant. The Nagual and Genaro gave him a final boost with power plants. He had the control and the power to handle that boost, and that's what sent him to wherever he is. The Genaros told me that Eligio jumped with Benigno. Is that true? Sure. By the time Eligio had to jump, his second attention had already been in that other world. The Nagual said that yours had also been there, but that for you it was a nightmare because you had no control. He said that his power plants had made you lopsided. They had made you cut through your attention of the tonal and had put you directly in the realm of your second attention, but without any mastery over that attention. The Nagual didn't give power plants to Eligio until the very last. Do you think that my second attention has been injured, Gorda? The Nagual never said that. He thought you were dangerously crazy, but that has nothing to do with power plants. He said that both of your attentions are unmanageable. If you could conquer them, you'd be a great warrior. I wanted her to tell me more on the subject. She put her hand on my writing pad and said that we had a terribly busy day ahead of us and we needed to store energy in order to withstand it. We had, therefore, to energize ourselves with the sunlight. She said that the circumstances required that we take the sunlight with the left eye. She began to move her head slowly from side to side as she glanced directly into the sun through her half-closed eyes. A moment later, Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina joined us. Lydia sat to my right, Josefina sat next to her, while Rosa sat next to La Gorda. All of them were resting their backs against the poles. I was in the middle of the row. It was a clear day. The sun was just above the distant range of mountains. They started moving their heads in perfect synchronization. I joined them and had the feeling that I too had synchronized my motion with theirs. They kept it up for about a minute and then stopped. All of them wore hats and used the brims to protect their faces from the sunlight when they weren't bathing their eyes in it. La Gorda had given me my old hat to wear. We sat there for about half an hour. In that time, we repeated the exercise countless times. I intended to make a mark on my pad for each time, but La Gorda very casually pushed my pad out of reach. Lydia suddenly stood up, mumbling something unintelligible. La Gorda leaned over to me and whispered that the Genaros were coming up the road. I strained to look, but there was no one in sight. Rosa and Josefina also stood up and then went with Lydia inside the house. I told La Gorda that I couldn't see anyone approaching. She replied that the Genaros had been visible at one point on the road and added that she had dreaded the moment when all of us would have to get together, but that she was confident that I could handle the situation. She advised me to be extra careful with Josefina and Pablito because they had no control over themselves. She said that the most sensible thing for me to do would be to take the Genaros away after an hour or so. I kept looking at the road. There was no sign of anyone approaching. "Are you sure they're coming?" I asked. She said that she hadn't seen them, but that Lydia had. The Genaros had been visible just for Lydia because she had been gazing at the same time she had been bathing her eyes. I wasn't sure what La Gorda had meant and asked her to explain. We're gazers, she said. Just like yourself. We're all the same. There's no need to deny that you're a gazer. The Nagual told us about your great feats of gazing. My great feats of gazing? What are you talking about, Gorda? She contracted her mouth and appeared to be on the verge of being irritated by my question. She seemed to catch herself. She smiled and gave me a gentle shove. At that moment, she had a sudden flutter in her body. She stared blankly past me. Then she shook her head vigorously. She said that she had just seen that the Genaros were not coming after all. It was too early for them. They were going to wait for a while before they made their appearance. She smiled, as if she were delighted with the delay. It's too early for us to have them here anyway, she said, and they feel the same about us. Where are they now? I asked. They must be sitting beside the road somewhere, she replied. Benigno had no doubt gazed at the house as they were walking and saw us sitting here, and that's why they've decided to wait. That's perfect. That will give us time. You scare me, Gorda. Time for what? You have to round up your second attention today, just for us four. How can I do that? I don't know. You are very mysterious to us. The Nagual has done scores of things to you with his power plants, but you can't claim that as knowledge. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Only if you have mastery over your second attention can you perform with it. Otherwise, you'll always stay fixed halfway between the two as you are now. Everything that has happened to you since you arrived has been directed to force that attention to spin. I've been giving you instructions little by little, just as the Nagual told me to do. Since you took another path, you don't know the things that we know, just like we don't know anything about power plants. Soledad knows a bit more, because the Nagual took her to his homeland. Nestor knows about medicinal plants, but none of us has been taught the way you were. We don't need your knowledge yet, but someday, when we're ready, you are the one who will know what to do to give us a boost with power plants. I am the only one who knows where the Nagual's pipe is hidden, waiting for that day. The Nagual's command is that you have to change your path and go with us. That means that you have to do dreaming with us and stalking with the Genaros. You can't afford any longer to be where you are on the awesome side of your second attention. Another jolt of your Nagual coming out of you could kill you. The Nagual told me that human beings are frail creatures, composed of many layers of luminosity. When you see them, they seem to have fibers, but those fibers are really layers, like an onion. Jolts of any kind separate those layers, and can even cause human beings to die. She stood up and led me back to the kitchen. We sat down facing each other. Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina were busy in the yard. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them talking and laughing. The Nagual said that we die because our layers become separated, La Gorda said. Jolts are always separating them, but they get together again. Sometimes, though, the jolt is so great that the layers get loose and can't get back together anymore. Have you ever seen the layers, Gorda? Sure. I saw a man dying in the street. The Nagual told me that you also found a man dying, but you didn't see his death. The Nagual made me see the dying man's layers. They were like the peels of an onion. When human beings are healthy, they're like luminous eggs, but if they're injured, they begin to peel like an onion. The Nagual told me that your second attention was so strong sometimes that it pushed all the way out. He and Genaro had to hold your layers together, otherwise you would have died. That's why he figured that you might have enough energy to get your Nagual out of you twice. He meant that you could hold your layers together by yourself twice. You did it more times than that, and now you're finished. You have no more energy to hold your layers together in case of another jolt. The Nagual has entrusted me to take care of everyone. In your case, I have to help you to tighten your layers. The Nagual said that death pushes the layers apart. He explained to me that the center of our luminosity, which is the attention of the Nagual, is always pushing out, and that's what loosens the layers. So it's easy for death to come in between them and push them completely apart. Sorcerers have to do their best to keep their own layers closed. That's why the Nagual taught us in dreaming. Dreaming tightens the layers. When sorcerers learn dreaming, they tie together their two attentions, and there's no more need for that center to push out. Do you mean that sorcerers do not die? That's right. Sorcerers do not die. Do you mean that none of us is going to die? I didn't mean us. We are nothing. We're freaks, neither here nor there. I meant sorcerers. The Nagual and Genaro are sorcerers. Their two attentions are so tightly together that perhaps they'll never die. Did the Nagual say that, Gorda? Yes, he and Genaro both told me that. Not too long before they left, the Nagual explained to us the power of attention. I never knew about the tonal and the Nagual until then. La Gorda recounted the way Don Juan had instructed them about that crucial tonal-Nagual dichotomy. She said that one day the Nagual had all of them gather together in order to take them for a long hike to a desolate rocky valley in the mountains. He made a large, heavy bundle with all kinds of items. He even put Pablito's radio in it. He then gave the bundle to Josefina to carry and put a heavy table on Pablito's shoulders, and they all started hiking. He made all of them take turns carrying the bundle and the table as they hiked nearly 40 miles to that high, desolate place. When they arrived there, the Nagual made Pablito set the table in the very center of the valley. Then he asked Josefina to arrange the contents of the bundle on the table. When the table was filled, he explained to them the difference between the tonal and the Nagual, in the same terms he'd explained it to me in a restaurant in Mexico City, except that in their case his example was infinitely more graphic. He told them that the tonal was the order that we are aware of in our daily world, and also the personal order that we carry through life on our shoulders, like they had carried that table and the bundle. The personal tonal of each of us was like the table in that valley, a tiny island filled with the things that we're familiar with. The Nagual, on the other hand, was the inexplicable source that held that table in place and was like the vastness of that deserted valley. He told them that sorcerers were obligated to watch their tonals from a distance in order to have a better grasp of what was really around them. He made them walk to a ridge from where they could view the whole area. From there, the table was hardly visible. He then made them go back to the table and had them all loom over it in order to show that an average man does not have the grasp that a sorcerer has, because an average man is right on top of his table, holding onto every item on it. He then made each of them, one at a time, casually look at the objects on the table and tested their recall by taking something and hiding it to see if they had been attentive. All of them passed the test with flying colors. He pointed out to them that their ability to remember so easily the items on that table was due to the fact that all of them had developed their attention of the tonal, or their attention over the table. He next asked them to look casually at everything that was on the ground underneath the table and tested their recall by removing the rocks, twigs, or whatever else was there. None of them could remember what they had seen under the table. The Nagual then swept everything off the top of the table and made each of them, one at a time, lie across it on their stomachs and carefully examine the ground underneath. He explained to them that for a sorcerer, the Nagual was the area just underneath the table. Since it was unthinkable to tackle the immensity of the Nagual as exemplified by that vast, desolate place, sorcerers took as their domain of activity the area directly below the island of the tonal, as graphically shown by what was underneath that table. That area was the domain of what he called the second attention, or the attention of the Nagual, or the attention under the table. That attention was reached only after warriors had swept the top of their tables clean. He said that reaching the second attention made the two attentions into a single unit, and that unit was the totality of oneself. La Gorda said that his demonstration was so clear to her that she understood at once why the Nagual had made her clean her own life, sweep her island of the Tonal, as he had called it. She felt that she had indeed been fortunate in having followed every suggestion that he had put to her. She was still a long way from unifying her two attentions, but her diligence had resulted in an impeccable life, which was, as he had assured her, the only way for her to lose her human form. Losing the human form was the essential requirement for unifying the two attentions. The attention under the table is the key to everything sorcerers do, she went on. In order to reach that attention, the Nagual and Genaro taught us dreaming, and you were taught about power plants. I don't know what they did to you to teach you how to trap your second attention with power plants, but to teach us how to do dreaming, the Nagual taught us gazing. He never told us what he was really doing to us. He just taught us to gaze. We never knew that gazing was the way to trap our second attention. We thought gazing was just for fun. That was not so. Dreamers have to be gazers before they can trap their second attention. The first thing the Nagual did was to put a dry leaf on the ground and make me look at it for hours. Every day he brought a leaf and put it in front of me. At first I thought that it was the same leaf that he saved from day to day, but then I noticed that leaves are different. The Nagual said that when we realize that, we're not looking anymore, but gazing. Then he put stacks of dry leaves in front of me. He told me to scramble them with my left hand and feel them as I gazed at them. A dreamer moves the leaves in spirals, gazes at them, and then dreams of the designs that the leaves make. The Nagual said that dreamers can consider themselves as having mastered leaf gazing when they dream the designs of the leaves first, and then find those same designs the next day in their pile of dry leaves. The Nagual said that gazing at leaves fortifies the second attention. If you gaze at a pile of leaves for hours, as you used to make me do, your thoughts get quiet. Without thoughts, the attention of the tonal wanes, and suddenly your second attention hooks onto the leaves, and the leaves become something else. The Nagual called the moment when the second attention hooks onto something stopping the world. And that is correct. The world stops. For this reason, there should always be someone around when you gaze. We never know about the quirks of our second attention. Since we've never used it, we have to become familiar with it before we could venture into gazing alone. The difficulty in gazing is to learn to quiet down the thoughts. The Nagual said that he preferred to teach us how to do that with a pile of leaves because we could get all the leaves we needed any time we wanted to gaze, but anything else would do the same job. Once you can stop the world, you are a gazer. And since the only way of stopping the world is by trying, the Nagual made all of us gaze at dry leaves for years and years. I think it's the best way to reach our second attention. He combined gazing at dry leaves and looking for our hands in dreaming. It took me about a year to find my hands, and 4 years to stop the world. The Nagual said that once you have trapped your second attention with dry leaves, you do gazing and dreaming to enlarge it. And that's all there is to gazing. You make it sound so simple, Gorda. Everything the Toltecs do is very simple. The Nagual said that all we needed to do in order to trap our second attention was to try and try. All of us stopped the world by gazing at dry leaves. You and Eligio were different. You yourself did it with power plants, but I don't know what path the Nagual followed with Eligio. He never wanted to tell me. He told me about you because we have the same task. I mentioned that I had written in my notes that I had had the first complete awareness of having stopped the world only a few days before. She laughed. You stopped the world before any of us, she said. What do you think you did when you took all those power plants? You've never done it by gazing like we did, that's all. Was the pile of dry leaves the only thing the Nagual made you gaze at? Once dreamers know how to stop the world, they can gaze at other things. And finally, when the dreamers lose their form altogether, they can gaze at anything. I do that. I can go into anything. He made us follow a certain order in gazing, though. First, we gazed at small plants. The Nagual warned us that small plants are very dangerous. Their power is concentrated. They have a very intense light, and they feel when dreamers are gazing at them. They immediately move their light and shoot it at the gazer. Dreamers have to choose one kind of plant to gaze at. Next, we gazed at trees. Dreamers also have a particular kind of tree to gaze at. In this respect, you and I are the same. Both of us are eucalyptus gazers. By the look on my face, she must have guessed my next question. The Nagual said that with his smoke, you could very easily get your second attention to work, she went on. You focused your attention lots of times on the Nagual's predilection, the crows. He said that once your second attention focused so perfectly on a crow that it flew away like a crow flies to the only eucalyptus tree that was around. For years, I had dwelled upon that experience. I couldn't regard it in any other way except as an inconceivably complex hypnotic state brought about by the psychotropic mushrooms contained in Don Juan's smoking mixture, in conjunction with his expertise as a manipulator of behavior. He suggested a perceptual catharsis in me, that of turning into a crow and perceiving the world as a crow. The result was that I perceived the world in a manner that could not have possibly been part of my inventory of past experiences. La Gorda's explanation somehow had simplified everything. She said that the Nagual next made them gaze at moving, living creatures. He told them that small insects were by far the best subject. Their mobility made them innocuous to the gazer, the opposite of plants which drew their light directly from the earth. The next step was to gaze at rocks. She said that rocks were very old and powerful, and had a specific light which was rather greenish in contrast with the white light of plants and the yellowish light of mobile living beings. Rocks did not open up easily to gazers, but it was worthwhile for gazers to persist, because rocks had special secrets concealed in their core, secrets that could aid sorcerers in their dreaming. What are the things that rocks reveal to you? I asked. When I gaze into the very core of a rock, she said, I always catch a whiff of a special scent proper to that rock. When I roam around in my dreaming, I know where I am because I'm guided by those scents. She said that the time of the day was an important factor in tree and rock gazing. In the early morning, trees and rocks were stiff and their light was faint. Around noon was when they were at their best, and gazing at that time was done for borrowing their light and power. In the late afternoon and early evening, trees and rocks were quiet and sad, especially trees. La Gorda said that at that hour, trees gave the feeling that they were gazing back at the gazer. A second series in the order of gazing was to gaze at cyclic phenomena, rain and fog. She said that gazers can focus their second attention on the rain itself and move with it, or focus it on the background and use the rain as a magnifying glass of sorts to reveal hidden features. Places of power, or places to be avoided, are found by gazing through rain. Places of power are yellowish, and places to be avoided are intensely green. La Gorda said that fog was unquestionably the most mysterious thing on earth for a gazer, and that it could be used in the same two ways that rain was used. But it didn't easily yield to women, and even after she had lost her human form, it remained unattainable to her. She said that the Nagual once made her see a green mist at the head of a fog bank, and told her that was the second attention of a fog gazer who lived in the mountains where she and the Nagual were, and that he was moving with the fog. She added that fog was used to uncover the ghosts of things that were no longer there, and that the true feat of fog gazers was to let their second attention go into whatever their gazing was revealing to them. I told her that once, while I was with Don Juan, I had seen a bridge formed out of a fog bank. I was aghast at the clarity and precise detail of that bridge. To me, it was more than real. The scene was so intense and vivid that I had been incapable of forgetting it. Don Juan's comments had been that I would have to cross that bridge someday. I know about it, she said. The Nagual told me that someday when you have mastery over your second attention, you'll cross that bridge with that attention, the same way you flew like a crow with that attention. He said that if you become a sorcerer, a bridge will form for you out of the fog, and you will cross it and disappear from this world forever, just like he himself has done. Did he disappear like that, over a bridge? Not over a bridge, but you witnessed how he and Genaro stepped into the crack between the worlds, in front of your very eyes. Nestor said that only Genaro waved his hand to say goodbye the last time you saw them. The Nagual didn't wave because he was opening the crack. The Nagual told me that when the second attention has to be called upon to assemble itself, all that is needed is the motion of opening that door. That's the secret of the Toltec dreamers once they are formless. I wanted to ask her about Don Juan and Don Genaro stepping through that crack. She made me stop with a light touch of her hand on my mouth. She said that another series was distance and cloud gazing. In both, the efforts of gazers was to let their second attention go to the place they were gazing at. Thus they covered great distances or rode on clouds. In the case of cloud gazing, the Nagual never permitted them to gaze at thunderheads. He told them that they had to be formless before they could attempt that feat, and that they could not only ride on a thunderhead, but on a thunderbolt itself. La Gorda laughed and asked me to guess who would be daring and crazy enough actually to try gazing at thunderheads. I could think of no one else but Josefina. La Gorda said that Josefina tried gazing at thunderheads every time she could when the Nagual was away, until one day a thunderbolt nearly killed her. Genaro was a thunderbolt sorcerer, she went on. His first two apprentices, Benigno and Nestor, were singled out for him by his friend, the Thunder. He said that he was looking for plants in a very remote area where the Indians are very private and don't like visitors of any kind. They'd given Genaro permission to be on their land, since he spoke their language. Genaro was picking some plants when it began to rain. There were some houses around, but the people were unfriendly and he didn't want to bother them. He was about to crawl into a hole when he saw a young man coming down the road riding a bicycle heavily laden with goods. It was Benigno, the man from the town who dealt with those Indians. His bicycle got stuck in the mud, and right there, a thunderbolt struck him. Genaro thought that he'd been killed. People in the houses had seen what happened and came out. Benigno was more scared than hurt, but his bicycle and all his merchandise were ruined. Genaro stayed with him for a week and cured him. Almost the same thing happened to Nestor. He used to buy medicinal plants from Genaro, and one day he followed him into the mountains to see where he picked his plants so he wouldn't have to pay for them anymore. Genaro went very far into the mountains on purpose. He intended to make Nestor get lost. It wasn't raining, but there were thunderbolts, and suddenly a thunderbolt struck the ground and ran over the dry ground like a snake. It ran right between Nestor's legs and hit a rock 10 yards away. Genaro said that the bolt had charred the inside of Nestor's legs. His testicles were swollen, and he got very ill. Genaro had to cure him for a week right in those mountains. By the time Benigno and Nestor were cured, they were also hooked. Men have to be hooked. Women don't need that. Women go freely into anything. That's their power, and at the same time, their drawback. Men have to be led, and women have to be contained. She giggled and said that no doubt she had a lot of maleness in her, for she needed to be led, and that I must have a lot of femaleness in me, for I needed to be contained. The last series was fire, smoke, and shadow gazing. She said that for a gazer, fire is not bright, but black, and so is smoke. Shadows, on the other hand, are brilliant and have color and movement in them. There were two more things that were kept separate: star and water gazing. Stargazing was done by sorcerers who have lost their human form. She said that she had fared very well at stargazing, but could not handle gazing at water, especially running water, which was used by formless sorcerers to gather their second attention and transport it to any place they needed to go. All of us are terrified of water, she went on. A river gathers the second attention and takes it away, and there's no way of stopping. The Nagual told me about your feats of water gazing, but he also told me that one time you nearly disintegrated in the water of a shallow river, and that you can't even take a bath now. Don Juan had made me stare at the water of an irrigation ditch behind his house various times while he had me under the influence of his smoking mixture. I had experienced inconceivable sensations. Once I saw myself all green, as if I were covered with algae. After that, he recommended that I avoid water. Has my second attention been injured by water? I asked. It has, she replied. You are a very indulging man. The Nagual warned you to be cautious, but you went beyond your limits with running water. The Nagual said that you could have used water like no one else, but it wasn't your fate to be moderate. She pulled her bench closer to mine. That's all there is to gazing, she said. But there are other things I must tell you before you leave. What things, Gorda? First of all, before I say anything, you must round up your second attention for the little sisters and me. I don't think I can do that. La Gorda stood up and went into the house. She came back a moment later with a small, thick, round cushion made out of the same natural fiber used in making nets. Without saying a word, she led me again to the front porch. She said that she had made that cushion herself for her comfort when she was learning to gaze, because the position of the body was of great importance while one was gazing. One had to sit on the ground on a soft mat of leaves, or on a cushion made out of natural fibers. The back had to be propped against a tree or a stump or a flat rock. The body had to be thoroughly relaxed. The eyes were never fixed on the object in order to avoid tiring them. The gaze consisted in scanning very slowly the object gazed at, going counterclockwise but without moving the head. She added that the Nagual had made them plant those thick poles so they could use them to prop themselves. She had me sit on her cushion and prop my back against a pole. She told me that she was going to guide me in gazing at a power spot that the Nagual had in the round hills across the valley. She hoped that by gazing at it, I would get the necessary energy to round up my second attention. She sat down very close to me, to my left, and began giving me instructions. Almost in a whisper, she told me to keep my eyelids half closed and stare at the place where two enormous round hills converged. There was a narrow, steep water canyon there. She said that that particular gazing consisted of 4 separate actions. The first one was to use the brim of my hat as a visor to shade off the excessive glare from the sun and allow only a minimal amount of light to come to my eyes. Then to half close my eyelids. The third step was to sustain the opening of my eyelids in order to maintain a uniform flow of light. And the fourth step was to distinguish the water canyon in the background through the mesh of light fibers on my eyelashes. I could not follow her instructions at first. The sun was high over the horizon, and I had to tilt my head back. I tipped my hat until I had blocked off most of the glare with the brim. That seemed to be all that was needed. As soon as I half closed my eyes, a bit of light that appeared as if it were coming from the tip of my hat literally exploded on my eyelashes, which were acting as a filter that created a web of light. I kept my eyelids half closed and played with the web of light for a moment until I could distinguish the dark, vertical outline of the water canyon in the background. La Gorda told me then to gaze at the middle part of the canyon until I could spot a very dark brown blotch. She said that it was a hole in the canyon which was not there for the eye that looks, but only for the eye that sees. She warned me that I had to exercise my control as soon as I had isolated that blotch so that it would not pull me toward it. Rather, I was supposed to zoom in on it and gaze into it. She suggested that the moment I found the hole, I should press my shoulders on hers to let her know. She slid sideways until she was leaning on me. I struggled for a moment to keep the 4 actions coordinated and steady, and suddenly a dark spot was formed in the middle of the canyon. I noticed immediately that I wasn't seeing it in the way I usually see. The dark spot was rather an impression, a visual distortion of sorts. The moment my control waned, it disappeared. It was in my field of perception only if I kept the 4 actions under control. I remembered then that Don Juan had engaged me countless times in a similar activity. He used to hang a small piece of cloth from a low branch of a bush, which was strategically located to be in line with specific geological formations and the mountains in the background, such as water canyons or slopes. By making me sit about 50 feet away from that piece of cloth and having me stare through the low branches of the bush where the cloth hung, he used to create a special perceptual effect in me. The piece of cloth, which was always a shade darker than the geological formation I was staring at, seemed to be at first a feature of that formation. The idea was to let my perception play without analyzing it. I failed every time because I was thoroughly incapable of suspending judgment, and my mind always entered into some rational speculation about the mechanics of my phantom perception. This time, I felt no need whatsoever for speculations. La Gorda was not an imposing figure that I unconsciously needed to fight, as Don Juan had obviously been to me. The dark blotch in my field of perception became almost black. I leaned on La Gorda's shoulder to let her know. She whispered in my ear that I should struggle to keep my eyelids in the position they were in and breathe calmly from my abdomen. I should not let the blotch pull me, but gradually go into it. The thing to avoid was letting the hole grow and suddenly engulf me. In the event that happened, I had to open my eyes immediately. I began to breathe as she had prescribed, and thus I could keep my eyelids fixed indefinitely at the appropriate aperture. I remained in that position for quite some time. Then I noticed that I had begun to breathe normally, and that it had not disturbed my perception of the dark blotch, but suddenly the dark blotch began to move, to pulsate, and before I could breathe calmly again, the blackness moved forward and enveloped me. I became frantic and opened my eyes. La Gorda said that I was doing distance gazing, and for that it was necessary to breathe the way she had recommended. She urged me to start all over again. She said that the Nagual used to make them sit for entire days, rounding up their second attention by gazing at that spot. He cautioned them repeatedly about the danger of being engulfed because of the jolt the body suffered. It took me about an hour of gazing to do what she had delineated. To zoom in on the brown spot and gaze into it meant that the brown patch in my field of perception lightened up quite suddenly. As it became clearer, I realized that something in me was performing an impossible act. I felt that I was actually advancing toward that spot, thus the impression I was having that it was clearing up. Then I was so near to it that I could distinguish features in it like rocks and vegetation. I came even closer and could look at a peculiar formation on one rock. It looked like a roughly carved chair. I liked it very much. Compared to it, the rest of the rocks seemed pale and uninteresting. I don't know how long I gazed at it. I could focus on every detail of it. I felt that I could lose myself forever in its detail because there was no end to it. But something dispelled my view. Another strange image was superimposed on the rock, and then another one, and another yet. I became annoyed with the interference. At the instant I became annoyed, I also realized that La Gorda was moving my head from side to side from behind me. In a matter of seconds, the concentration of my gazing had been thoroughly dissipated. La Gorda laughed and said that she understood why I had caused the Nagual such an intense concern. She had seen for herself that I indulged beyond my limits. She sat against the pole next to me and said that she and the little sisters were going to gaze into the Nagual's power place. She then made a piercing bird call. A moment later, the little sisters came out of the house and sat down to gaze with her. Their gazing mastery was obvious. Their bodies acquired a strange rigidity. They didn't seem to be breathing at all. Their stillness was so contagious that I caught myself half closing my eyes and staring into the hills. Gazing had been a true revelation to me. In performing it, I had corroborated some important issues of Don Juan's teachings. La Gorda had delineated the task in a definitely vague manner. To zoom in on it was more a command than a description of a process, and yet it was a description providing that one essential requirement had been fulfilled. Don Juan had called that requirement stopping the internal dialogue. From La Gorda's statements about gazing, it was obvious to me that the effect Don Juan had been after in making them gaze was to teach them to stop the internal dialogue. La Gorda had expressed it as quieting down the thoughts. Don Juan had taught me to do that very same thing, although he had made me follow the opposite path. Instead of teaching me to focus my view as gazers did, he taught me to open it, to flood my awareness by not focusing my sight on anything. I had to sort of feel with my eyes everything in the 180-degree range in front of me, while I kept my eyes unfocused just above the line of the horizon. It was very difficult for me to gaze because it entailed reversing that training. As I tried to gaze, my tendency was to open up. The effort of keeping that tendency in check, however, made me shut off my thoughts. Once I had turned off my internal dialogue, it wasn't difficult to gaze as La Gorda had prescribed. Don Juan had asserted time and time again that the essential feature of his sorcery was shutting off the internal dialogue. In terms of the explanation La Gorda had given me about the two realms of attention, stopping the internal dialogue was an operational way of describing the act of disengaging the attention of the tonal. Don Juan had also said that once we stop our internal dialogue, we also stop the world. That was an operational description of the inconceivable process of focusing our second attention. He had said that some part of us is always kept under lock and key because we're afraid of it, and that, to our reason, that part of us was like an insane relative that we keep locked in a dungeon. That part was, in La Gorda's terms, our second attention, and when it finally could focus on something, the world stopped. Since we, as average men, know only the attention of the tonal, it's not too far-fetched to say that once that attention is cancelled, the world indeed has to stop. The focusing of our wild, untrained second attention has to be, perforce, terrifying. Don Juan was right in saying that the only way to keep that insane relative from bursting in on us was by shielding ourselves with our endless internal dialogue. La Gorda and the little sisters stood up after perhaps 30 minutes of gazing. La Gorda signaled me with her head to follow them. They went to the kitchen. La Gorda pointed to a bench for me to sit on. She said that she was going up the road to meet the Genaros and bring them over. She left through the front door.